18 years. That was how long Command Sergeant Major Elias Thorne had listened to the wheels of his own chair squeak down other men's hallways, while specialist after specialist told his family the same sentence. The cord is dead. The soldier is finished. Take him home. On a gray Tuesday in Chicago, the chief of neurology barely lifted his eyes before he ordered the night nurse to roll the old man back out to the parking lot. But that nurse had touched a scar like his once behind a locked door in a program the government still swears never existed, and when her fingers found the small, hard bead beneath his skin, 18 years of silence drew its first breath. What she did in the 90 minutes that followed not one framed diploma on that chief's wall had taught him how to believe. If this story already has its hand around your collar, do one small thing for me before we go on. Tap the like button, leave a comment telling me which city you are listening from tonight, and subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this family. Welcome in. Let us begin. Dr. Garrett Holloway did not work nights, and he wanted that understood by everyone who saw him in the building after 8. He was chair of neurology at the Calder Neuroscience Institute, and his name was carved into a glass wall on the 2nd floor beside a list of grants that had bought most of the machines on the 4th. He came in that Tuesday evening only because a donor's nephew had been admitted with a migraine, and by the time he had smiled his way through that visit, he was in a foul coat-buttoned mood, standing at the consult desk in the East Corridor, as though the corridor had been built to inconvenience him. The clock above the desk read 7:50. Rain moved sideways across the tall windows. Somewhere down the hall, a wheelchair caster needed oil, and the thin, rhythmic squeak of it carried all the way to where Holloway stood, and he frowned at the sound, the way another man might frown at a fly. Nora Calloway heard the same squeak and did not frown because she had been walking toward it for the last 30 seconds. She had been on the floor since 6 that evening and would be on it until 7 the next morning. In 2 hours, she had hung a fresh line on a stroke patient in Bay, 3-talked a frightened wife through her first night of not knowing, and caught a post-operative man in Bay 5 whose pressure had started to slide before the monitor thought to complain about it. She had done that last part quietly, the way she did everything, and by the time the resident arrived, she was already gone from the room and restocking a cart 2 doors down. She was 43 years old. She wore plain navy scrubs, no jewelry, a low knot of brown hair going gray at the left temple. On her left forearm from the wrist halfway to the elbow ran a wide, pale graft of skin that did not quite match the skin around it, the record of a burn she never explained. In the right pocket of her scrubs sat a brass coin, worn smooth at the edges, from years of being turned over between a thumb and 2 fingers. Nobody at Calder had ever seen it. She turned it now once and let it go. The squeak belonged to Bay 9, the last glass room at the end of the East Corridor, and through the glass, Nora slowed and looked before she touched the handle. 3 people. A woman, near 40, sandy hair pulled back hard, both hands locked white on the push handles of a wheelchair, like she was afraid the floor might tilt. A tall boy in a hooded sweatshirt from a community college, standing too straight the way young men stand when they have decided to be useful and do not yet know how. And in the chair, a man. You could still read the size of him even folded down. Broad through the shoulders, big forearms gone, soft hands resting on his thighs, like 2 tools set down and forgotten. He wore a zipped gray fleece over a collared shirt, and his head was bowed chin toward his chest, in the posture of a man who had stopped expecting anyone in a room to be looking at him. His hair was silver and cropped close, military, close grown out only at the neck. And there just behind and below his left ear, over the hard knob of bone, the anatomists call the mastoid. Nora saw it as he bowed a little further. A scar, old, faded to a thin silver line about an inch long, curved deliberate. not the ragged mark of a wound, the clean mark of a hand that had known exactly where it was going. Nora's own hand stopped on the door handle. She had not seen a scar in that particular place in more than 9 years. Not since a room with no windows and a lock that logged every entry. Not since a file she was no longer allowed to open. She breathed in through her nose, and she pushed the door open. "Good evening," she said. "I am Nora Calloway. I will be your intake nurse tonight." The daughter looked up, first her eyes dry and red-rimmed and exhausted past crying. "Marin Thorne," she said. "This is my son Toby, and this is my father. Command Sergeant Major Elias Thorne, United States Army, retired." Nora did not react, because her training had taught her a long time ago that reacting is a luxury. But something inside her turned a quarter degree and settled the way a compass needle swings once and then holds on north after a long time of being carried at the wrong angle. "It is an honor, Sergeant Major," she said. The old man did not raise his head. "Ma'am," he said to his own hands. Marin filled the silence, because someone in that family had learned to always fill it. "We have been to 4 places this year," she said. 2 in Minnesota, 1 in Cleveland. 1 program in Germany that took $11,000 and gave us a pamphlet. My father took a rocket-propelled grenade against his vehicle in the Korengal in 2008. The blast rolled the truck. His spine was crushed at the 10th thoracic level. Every doctor since has told us the same thing, that the injury is complete and permanent, and there is nothing left below the line. But a Veterans Affairs neurologist in Rockford said there was a man here, a Dr. Holloway, who had written something about recovered signal in old injuries. We have been on the waiting list for 7 months for tonight." Nora glanced at the chart in the sleeve on the wall. She did not take it out. She already knew in her chest most of what would be inside it. "May I check your vitals?" "Sergeant Major," she said. He lifted his head then. His eyes were a flat, weathered gray, the color of a lake under low cloud, and they moved over her face the way a man reads terrain he has walked before. "Go ahead, ma'am," he said. She wrapped the cuff. She set her stethoscope. 58/128 over 80 skin cool at the hands. Steady. Then gently, with 2 fingers, she moved the collar of his fleece a ½ inch off his neck and looked again at the small, curved scar behind his ear and at the way the skin sat over it, and her own pulse did something she did not let reach her face. "Sergeant Major," she said, "did you receive any care in the field before you were flown out?" He looked at her for a long moment, and a man who had spent 30 years reading soldiers read her now. "There was a medic," he said. "Special Forces, one of the 18 Deltas. He did something at the back of my neck in the dust before the bird came. I was told later it kept me alive. Nobody ever told me what it was." Nora eased the collar back down over the scar. "Thank you, sir," she said. Behind her, the glass door hissed open, and Dr. Garrett Holloway walked in without greeting a single person in the room. He lifted the chart from the wall, sleeve turned 2 pages with a dry sound, and closed it. "Mr. Thorne," he said. Marin's spine went rigid. "Sergeant Major Thorne." Holloway looked up as if noticing her for the first time, and Nora, standing at the head of the chair, with her hand resting quiet on the frame, felt the whole familiar shape of the next few minutes arrive before it happened. "Mr. Thorne," Holloway said again as if the correction had not happened. "I have read your file. There is nothing here to discuss. The damage to your spinal cord is what 4 other neurologists have already called it. Complete. The lesion sits at the 10th thoracic vertebra. There is no operation, no device, and no experimental program on this earth that restores function to a cord that has been dead for 18 years. Marin's knuckles went from white to bloodless. "Doctor, the neurologist in Rockford said you had published research." "Research is research, madam." Holloway set the chart back in its sleeve without looking at her. "It is not a promise made to every family that drives here in the rain. Your father is a man in his 60s, whose injury is older than the fellowship of the resident I would assign to him. I will not take his money. I will not take your evening. That is not cruelty. That is the only honest thing anyone in this building will tell you." He turned toward the door. "Calloway, discharge them. Route the family to case management for a list of long-term care facilities." Nora did not move. She stood at the head of the wheelchair with her hand on the frame, and she did not answer, and she did not step toward the door. And after a second that stretched a little too long, Holloway noticed. People who give orders always notice the one body in the room that has not obeyed. Toby looked at his grandfather. His grandfather was looking at the floor. The sergeant major had not argued. He had not lifted his head. He had absorbed the whole of it without a flicker, the way a man absorbs weather, and that stillness that trained, worn-down acceptance in a soldier who had once given orders to 1,000 men was the thing that finally moved something loose behind Nora Calloway's ribs. "Dr. Holloway," she said. Her voice was low and level and carried no heat at all. "May I have a word with you in the corridor?" The room went quiet. The fluorescent tube above the sink gave its faint electric hum, and for a moment that hum was the loudest thing in Bay 9. Holloway turned. He looked at her, the way a man looks at a piece of furniture that has spoken. "Calloway," he said, "I do not take clinical direction from the night nursing staff. Discharge the patient." "Dr. Holloway?" Same volume, same flatness. A word. "In the corridor. Before this family goes anywhere." Behind her, the sergeant major lifted his head 1 inch. He had heard a voice pitched exactly like that once, a long time ago in a different kind of dark, from a person who was about to do something the rest of the room would remember for the rest of their lives. He watched her now, with a new and careful attention. Holloway's jaw worked. Then he produced a short, thin laugh, the laugh of a man who has decided to be amused because the alternative is to be unsettled. "By all means," he said, and stepped out into the corridor. Nora turned to the daughter. "Ms. Thorne, do not leave this room. Do not move that chair. I will be back in 2 minutes." Marin nodded once and did not ask why. The east corridor was empty at that hour, the far end dim a housekeeping cart parked against the wall. Holloway crossed his arms. "Make it fast, Calloway, and understand that this is the last conversation of this kind you will ever begin with me." Nora did not cross her arms. Her hands hung loose at her sides, and in the right pocket of her scrubs, her thumb found the worn edge of the coin and held it. "The sergeant major has a scar behind his left mastoid," she said. A clean curved incision roughly 1 inch, 18 years old, made by someone who knew precisely which plane to enter. That is not a wound scar. That is a surgical access made for a subcutaneous conduction relay placed in the field for spinal blast trauma. The procedure came out of a joint special operations medical program that ran from 2006 to 2013. It was classified until 2019. It has never appeared in a civilian neurology text, which is the only reason 4 of your colleagues could look at his films and see nothing but a dead cord. Holloway stared at her. For the first time that evening, the arranged expression on his face slipped. "What did you just say to me?" "I said the medic in the Korengal that night did something to the back of this man's neck that no one at Mayo or in Cleveland or in Germany would ever have been trained to look for. And I said that if that relay was placed within the window it was designed for, then his cord was very likely never transected. It went into a prolonged conduction block. 18 years of disuse atrophy stacked on top of that. But the cord itself, doctor, may still be intact and still carrying signal along a parallel path." Holloway's arms came uncrossed. "That is not a real technology. I would know it if it were." "You would know it if it had ever been allowed into a journal you read," Nora said. "It was not. It was buried in a single declassified appendix, 3 paragraphs, No diagrams released the same month as 1,000 other pages nobody indexed. The people who could have taught it to you were told to file the work and walk away. And you know all of this, Holloway said slowly, because a night nurse at Calder happens to read declassified defense appendices for pleasure. I know all of this, she said, because I am going to put my hands on the back of that man's neck with his permission and show you a signal that 4 neurologists missed. It will take me 6 minutes. After that, this family can make an informed decision, which is the one thing no one has offered them in 11 months. For a long moment, Holloway said nothing. Then his voice dropped into the cold, quiet register that men like him keep for the people they are certain cannot hurt them. You are going to walk back into that room, he said. You are going to apologize to me in front of that family. You are going to discharge that patient exactly as I ordered. And in the morning, you are going to walk into human resources and resign, because I will make certain that whatever license you hold is not worth the paper by the end of the week. Do you understand me, Calloway? Nora Calloway looked at him. She did not blink, and she did not raise her voice, and something behind her eyes had gone very still and very old. The stillness of a person who has already been threatened by people with far more authority than a hospital chair in rooms where the stakes were measured in lives rather than careers. I understand you completely, Doctor, she said. Then she turned, opened the door to Bay 9, and walked back inside. Marin was standing exactly where she had left her. Toby had not moved from his father's shoulder. The sergeant major had lifted his head fully now, and his gray eyes were fixed on the door, and they found Nora's face the moment she came through it. She crossed the small room and pulled the exam stool close to the wheelchair and sat so that her face was level with his. She rested her right hand on the armrest near his, but not touching. On her left forearm, the pale graft caught the overhead light. Sergeant Major Thorne, she said, and her voice had changed. It was quieter now and steadier, stripped of the flat professional gloss it had carried all evening. I would like to examine the back of your neck and your lower spine. I am not going to promise you anything, and I am not going to lie to you. I have not done what I am about to do in more than 9 years. But I believe the medic in that valley saved more of you than any doctor in 18 years has known how to look for. I need your permission, sir. The old soldier looked at her for a long time. He looked at the pale graft on her forearm, at the steadiness in her hands, at the way she had not once glanced at the door for approval. He had spent his whole adult life learning to tell in a handful of seconds which people in a room would break and which would hold. He read her the way he had read hard ground under fire, and in the quiet of that small glass room, a man who had not asked anyone on earth for anything in 18 years lowered his chin a half-inch. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You may." And behind Nora, the glass door hissed open a second time, and Garrett Holloway stepped back into the room with his phone already in his hand, and a look on his face that said he had made a decision of his own. "I have just paged security," Holloway said. His voice had gone smooth again, the composure back in place like a coat rebuttoned. "And patient transport. The sergeant major will be discharged within the half hour. You will escort this family to the lobby, Calloway, and then you will wait in my office. We will discuss your employment there." Nora did not stand. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the old man, and the old man kept his eyes on her. "Calloway," a degree louder. "I heard you, doctor." Her voice stayed low. "I am going to perform a brief neurological assessment on this patient with his consent, and it is going to take 6 minutes. You are welcome to stay and watch it, or you are welcome to leave. Either way, it is going to happen. You will do no such thing." No. It was the sergeant major. He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. He had spoken across a running vehicle engine and over the flat crack of gunfire for 30 years before anyone handed him a wheelchair, and the single word filled the small room and stayed in it. Holloway's mouth stopped moving. Elias Thorne lifted his head another half-inch, and for the first time all evening he sat, like the man the file described, rather than the man in the chair. "Doctor," he said, "I have been given orders my whole life. By men with rank you will never carry. I have been shouted at by generals, and prayed over by chaplains, and lied to by better liars than you. I do not require your permission to let this woman put her hands on the back of my neck for 6 minutes. Sit down, or get out." For a moment, Holloway simply stood there, the phone loose in his hand. Then he stepped back against the counter and said nothing, and that was as much of a yes as he was going to give. Nora rose from the stool and went to the supply cabinet on the wall. She opened it and took out 3 things: a penlight, a reflex hammer, and from the pocket of her own scrubs, not from the cabinet, a flat roll of oilcloth, the color of old canvas tied with a cord small enough to fit in a palm. She set the roll on the rolling tray and did not untie it yet. Toby was watching the roll. "What is that?" "In a minute," Nora said gently. She wanted the family to understand what they were about to see, so she spoke while she worked the way she had once been trained to narrate, for people who needed to trust a hand they could not follow. Because to understand what her hands were doing, you have to know where those hands had been. 9 years earlier, before nursing school, before Chicago, before the plain Navy scrubs, Nora Calloway had held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, and she had run a research cell inside a facility that appeared on no public directory in a wing that everyone who worked there simply called the Annex. The program had a name, Latchkey, and a single purpose. In the field, medics attached to special operations had begun placing an experimental device in soldiers with catastrophic spinal blast trauma, a subcutaneous relay that did not repair a damaged cord, but held the line across it, routing a low patient current along an alternate nerve path so that the cord below the injury never went fully dark. Most of the men who received it did not survive their evacuation. The ones who did came home were discharged and vanished into wheelchairs and VA rolls, and it was Nora's cell that was supposed to find them again, map what the relay had preserved, and write the protocol that would wake it back up. She had the scar of that work on her own arm. In her second year, a transport helicopter carrying 2 of her patients had caught fire on a training field in the dark, and she had gone back in for the second man and gotten him out and paid for it with the graft that now ran from her wrist to her elbow. She did not talk about that either. They shut Latchkey down in 2013, in a budget cycle between fiscal quarters, the way large things are quietly killed. Nora was handed a sealed list of the men her program had tracked and told in plain words that she would never be permitted to contact a single one of them, not to tell them what was under their skin, not to offer them the protocol, not to inform their wives and their children that the cord they had buried 18 years ago was still faintly alive. She fought it through every channel she had. She lost. She resigned her commission the following spring, and because she could not bear to work in medicine as an officer of a system that had told her to look away, she went to nursing school under her own plain name, and she came to Calder, and she pinned nothing to her chest and told no one anything. And for 8 years, she had carried the oilcloth roll in the bottom of her locker and never once untied the cord. She untied it now. The cloth unrolled across the tray. Inside lay a slim, flexible strip, dark with 12 small copper contacts stitched into it, in a pattern no civilian medical supplier had ever manufactured, and a controller the size of a car key with 1 dial and 1 button. The copper caught the fluorescent light in 12 dull points. Holloway pushed off the counter. "What is that?" "A manual peripheral stimulation array," Nora said. 12-point. It is not standard equipment. It is mine. That is not approved for use in this building. The protocol it runs was declassified 7 years ago and published for anyone to use. she said without heat. You can look it up while I work. She turned back to the wheelchair and lowered her voice to the register she kept for the person who mattered most in the room. Sergeant Major, I'm going to need to see your lower back. May I have your permission to help you out of the fleece and the shirt down to the waist? Yes, ma'am. Marin moved first, her exhaustion gone somewhere behind a sudden fierce focus. She unzipped the fleece. Toby stepped in and lifted his grandfather's heavy arms one at a time, while Marin worked the shirt buttons, and between the two of them, gently, the way a family learns to move a body. It loves, they brought the shirt away. The torso underneath belonged to a man who had been powerful once and had been still for far too long. The chest was broad and gone soft, the skin loose over old muscle, a long, pale scar crossing the lower ribs where the blast had opened him. When Toby eased him forward against his own chest, the bones of the shoulder blades stood up sharp under paper-thin skin. And there, running down beside the spine from the base of the neck, Nora found the second mark. Small, round, no bigger than a pea, raised just slightly under the skin, the kind of thing a civilian would take for an old cyst and never think of again. She closed her eyes for half a second. She opened them. Dr. Holloway, she said, come and look at this. He did not move. Doctor, she said, still not turning around. I am going to give you one chance to be standing in this room for the next 20 minutes. Because if I am right, and I believe that I am, what is about to happen in here is going to be written up within the year. And your name will not be on that paper unless you are standing here to witness it with your own eyes. Holloway did not move, but he did not leave either. Nora leaned in. She laid the pad of her right index finger on the small round marker beside the old soldier's spine, and she rested her left hand flat and warm between his shoulder blades, and she closed her eyes, and she pressed just slightly. Elias Thorne made a sound. It was not a word. It was a short, broken catch of breath, the sound a man makes when something he stopped feeling before his grandson was born sends back a single faint signal from very far away. Marin's hand flew to her mouth. Toby went absolutely still. Holloway took 2 steps forward. What did you just do to him? Nora opened her eyes. I pressed on the relay marker, she said. Now, doctor, come and see how much of this man is still in there. This time, Holloway came. He crossed the small room and stopped at Nora's left shoulder and looked down at the pea-sized marker beside the old soldier's spine, and whatever certainty he had carried into Bay 9 an hour ago was starting visibly to leak out of him. There is a subcutaneous marker under that skin, Nora said, keeping her finger where it was. 4, maybe 5 millimeters. It sits over the relay. To anyone who has never seen one, it looks like a sebaceous cyst, which is exactly why it was designed to look like that. The relay itself runs along the paraspinal line outside the vertebral column, from the cervical axis, down past the level of his injury. It does not repair the cord. It maintains conduction continuity across the damaged segment by carrying a low current along a parallel pathway continuously for as long as the man is alive. Doctor, this cord has not been silent for 18 years. It has been idling. Holloway's voice, when it came, had lost its edge entirely. That is not possible. It is on the man's back, Nora said. Possible stopped being the question about a minute ago. She reached for the reflex hammer, but she did not use it yet. Instead, she looked up past Holloway to the doorway, where a young woman in a white coat had appeared, and stopped holding a tablet against her chest, watching the room with an expression caught between protocol and disbelief. Dr. Holloway paged me, the young woman said. I am the neurology resident on tonight, Priya Anand. Her eyes went to the copper strip on the tray, to the bare-backed patient, to the nurse crouched at his spine, and her voice thinned. I'm sorry, what exactly is happening here? Dr. Anand, Nora said before Holloway could speak. "You are going to want to stand where you can see this. Come to my right." Anand looked at the chief. Holloway said nothing. That silence from a man who narrated his own certainty for a living told the resident more than any order could have, and she came around to Nora's right and looked down, and Nora watched her find the marker and understand that she was looking at something no lecture had prepared her for. "Sergeant Major," Nora said, "I am going to lay this array across your lower back copper against the skin, and I am going to send 12 small pulses in a set order. You may feel pins and needles. You may feel warmth. You may feel nothing at all. If anything I do causes pain, you tell me, and I stop. Understood. Understood, ma'am. Toby, hold the pillow to your chest and let your grandfather lean his weight into you. Keep his shoulders square." The boy moved without being told twice. He pressed the pillow to his own sternum and let the old man rest against it, and the bare back came fully open to the light. Nora unrolled the array the rest of the way and set it across the paraspinal line low just above the belt of his slacks, the 12 copper points settling against skin that had not felt an ordered current in a very long time. She picked up the controller, turned the dial to 1, and pressed the button. Elias Thorne drew a sharp breath. "Pins and needles, sir." "Yes." His voice was rough. "Left hip, running down to the knee." Nora's hand did not shake. "Good," she said. "That is exactly what it should be." Marin made a small sound and pressed both hands over her mouth. Anand leaned closer, and Nora saw the resident's professional composure crack straight down the middle. "The current is not moving muscle yet," Anand said quietly, half to herself. That was pure sensory. He felt that in a dermatome below a complete injury. "He did," Nora said. "Watch the next one." She turned the dial to 2 and pressed. The sergeant major's right thigh moved, not a spasm, not the involuntary jerk that families of paralyzed men learn to recognize and learn to stop hoping about. A small, smooth, deliberate contraction of the quadriceps, the muscle drawing up under the loose fabric of his slacks, in a way that had intention behind it, a signal that had traveled down and been received and answered. The old man looked down at his own leg. He did not say anything. He looked at it the way a man looks at a face he had given up on ever seeing again. Toby began to cry silently, the pillow still pressed to his chest, the tears just running, and his jaw locked tight against any sound. He did not move an inch. He held his grandfather up and he wept, and he did not make a single noise. Anand's hand had come up to her own mouth. "Turn it back," she whispered. "Do it again." Nora turned the dial to 0, then back to 2, and pressed. The quadriceps drew up a second time, the same clean contraction, and this time, the sergeant major's foot shifted inside his shoe, the whole leg answering as one linked thing. "That is a voluntary motor unit responding to an ordered stimulus," Anand said. Her voice had gone unsteady. "In a patient with a documented complete injury at T10, 18 years out." She looked up at Nora, and for a moment the resident and the night nurse simply looked at each other across the bare back of an old soldier, and the entire hierarchy of the room quietly rearranged itself. "Who trained you to do this?" "That is a longer conversation," Nora said. "Sergeant Major, one more. Tell me what you feel." She turned the dial to 3 and pressed. His right calf contracted. The toes of his right foot inside the shoe curled downward against the leather, a slow, controlled flex, the most ordinary movement in the world, and the most impossible thing anyone in that room had ever seen. Marin sank down onto the exam stool because her legs had stopped holding her. Anand pressed her tablet flat against her chest, as if she needed something to hold on to. Elias Thorne stared at the wall. He was breathing in the careful, measured way of a man who has decided he will not weep in front of strangers, drawing each breath long and letting it out slow. He did not weep. but a single line of water slid from the outer corner of his right eye down the deep crease beside his nose and disappeared into the silver stubble at his jaw, and he let it go without wiping it away, because both of his hands were busy learning to belong to him again. Nora turned the dial back to 0 and set the controller down on the tray. She stood. The pale graft on her forearm caught the light as she straightened. She looked at Holloway, who had not spoken in several minutes, whose arms hung at his sides, whose eyes had the specific, unfocused quality of a man watching the floor of everything he believed shift under him. "Dr. Moore," she said, "I am going to need a full spine MRI cervical through lumbar with contrast. I am going to need an EMG and a nerve conduction study of both lower extremities. I am going to need a physical medicine and rehabilitation specialist with experience in chronic disuse atrophy. Tonight, if you can reach one. And the sergeant major and his family are going to be admitted and stay in this hospital tonight." Holloway opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "Calloway," he said, and his voice was not the voice he had walked in with. "Who are you?" Nora looked down for a moment at the 12 copper points against the old soldier's back, and at the pale graft on her own arm, and at the brass coin she had set on the corner of the tray, without anyone noticing when she took it out of her pocket. Then she looked up. "I am the night nurse, doctor," she said. "Now please go and order that MRI." By 10 that night, the Calder Neuroscience Institute had begun to move like a building that did not yet understand what was happening inside one of its own glass rooms. The MRI suite on the 2nd floor was cleared of a scheduled outpatient. A radiologist named David Okonkwo was pulled off his own dinner by a call from Holloway himself, which the switchboard operator would remark on later, because in 9 years, Garrett Holloway had never once personally requested an emergency scan for anyone. An EMG technician was told to bring a portable cart up to Bay 9 and wait. And Priya Anand, who 6 hours earlier had expected an ordinary night of headaches and medication reconciliations, stood at the counter outside the glass, writing on a paper towel because she could not make her hand slow down enough to open the electronic chart. Nora did not write in the chart either. Not yet. She wrote on a folded index card in a small, fast shorthand she had not used in 9 years, the shorthand of a person who had once written reports that other people were forbidden to read. Sensory response left L2 dermatome at setting 1. Quadriceps contraction, right setting 2 repeatable. Calf and distal flexion, right setting 3. No pain reported. Relay marker palpable cervical to lumbar paraspinal intact. She underlined the last word once. Marin came out to the counter. Her eyes were swollen, but her hands for the first time all evening were steady. "He is asking for you," she said. Inside Bay 9 they had dressed him again. The fleece zipped a blanket across his lap, and to anyone walking past the glass, he was exactly what he had been at 7:40, an old man in a chair. But Nora saw the difference. His shoulders rode a half-inch higher, his chin was up. His eyes followed her across the room instead of resting on the floor. Toby sat on the exam stool with his hands loose in his lap, his eyes red. Marin took her place at the head of the chair. The sergeant major spoke first. "Before they run me through that machine," he said, "I want to know something. What is your name? Your real one?" Nora did not answer right away. She pulled the second stool over and sat down at eye level with him and set her hands palm down on her knees. "My name is Nora Calloway," she said. "That part is true, but it is not all of it." "No," he said. "I didn't think it was." She looked at Marin and at Toby and back at the old man who had held the country's secrets for 30 years and knew the weight of one when it was handed to him. And she made a small decision. "Lieutenant Colonel Nora Calloway," she said quietly. "United States Air Force retired. From 2006 to 2013. I ran a research cell inside a joint special operations medical program. We studied the men who received the relay in the field, what it preserved, whether it could be woken back up. We were close to a protocol when the program was shut down in a budget cycle. Everything was sealed, the devices, the arrays, the names. I left the service the next spring. The room was very quiet. Marin's hand had gone to her mouth again. "Why did you stop, ma'am?" the sergeant major said. "Why become a nurse?" Nora was silent for a moment. "Because when they closed us down," she said, "I was holding a list. 33 men had received the relay and lived long enough to come home. 19 of them were still alive the last time I was allowed to look. I knew where most of them were, and I was told in a room with no window that I would never be permitted to contact a single one, not to tell them what was under their skin, not to offer them what we had learned, not to tell their wives that the injury they had buried might not be as complete as everyone believed. I fought it. I lost. I took off the uniform because I could not stand in a hospital as an officer of the thing that had told me to look away. So I became a nurse. I have worked at Calder for 8 years. In 8 years, I never once untied that roll in my locker. Until tonight. The old man looked at her for a long, long moment. "I was on that list," he said. Nora did not move. "Yes, sir," she said. "You were number 22. Elias Thorne closed his eyes and kept them closed for the better part of a minute. When he opened them, his voice was low and even. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology, and I have not had to give one of these in a while, so bear with me. I have spent 18 years believing I was a man whose body had been broken in a way nobody could reach. I told my daughter to stop hoping. I told my son the same before he passed, and I never got to take it back with him. I sat in this chair, and I made peace with a lie, because the lie was easier than one more doctor telling me no. And the only reason I'm not still sitting inside that lie tonight is that you walked into this room and you looked at a scar 4 other men had already decided not to see." Nora did not answer. There was nothing to add to it. The old man lifted his right hand off the blanket, the hand that an hour ago had rested on his thigh like a forgotten tool, and he held it out across the small space between them. Nora took it. He squeezed. Not hard, not weak, exactly enough. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said. "Thank you." Her eyes stayed level, and her chin stayed level, but her throat closed for the length of one breath, and she nodded once and did not let go of his hand. And for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. And the only sound in Bay 9 was the faint tick of the wall clock, and far down the corridor, the squeak of some other patient's chair. The glass door opened. Holloway stood in it. He had changed into a fresh white coat, his silver hair still parted with precision, but a single strand had come loose at the temple, and he had not fixed it. And his face wore the specific gray exhaustion of a man who had spent the last hour on the telephone with people he had not wanted to call. Hearing the same answer from each of them, "Dr. Okonkwo is ready in imaging," he said. His voice had lost its edge entirely. "I have spoken with the Institute's medical director and with our risk office. The sergeant major will be admitted under my service as attending of record. But you will be the clinical lead on this case, Lieutenant Colonel." He said the rank without stumbling, which cost him something, and everyone in the room heard it cost him. "Dr. Anand and Dr. Okonkwo and the rehab service will take direction from you." "Yes, doctor," Nora said. "Earlier tonight," Holloway said, and stopped and made himself go on. "I told you to discharge this man. I told you to resign. I wanted on the record in front of his family that I was wrong." Nora looked at him. Her gray eyes did not soften. "Dr. Holloway," she said, "the record will hold whatever it needs to hold. What matters now is his scan." Holloway nodded once and stepped aside. Toby stood up from the stool. He picked up the blanket that had slid halfway off his grandfather's knees, and he folded it slowly in careful halves, The way you fold something that has been passed down," and he laid it back across the old man's lap. Marin took the handles of the chair, and the sergeant major, as they turned him toward the door, brought his right hand up to his brow in a small, exact salute, and Nora returned it, and the chair rolled out into the bright corridor, where a small crowd of night staff had gathered, without quite admitting to each other why. The scan told the truth the scar had promised. David Okonkwo came up from imaging himself rather than send the images through the system, and he found Nora in the family alcove off the 4th floor ward at 1:30 in the morning, a cup of cold coffee in front of her untouched. "The cord at T10 is not transected," he said. He set his tablet on the table and did not turn it toward her, because he needed to say it out loud before he could show it. "It is compressed. It is atrophied to about half the diameter it should be, but the dura is intact, and there is a bright signal running along the lateral aspect that I have never seen in 20 years of reading these films. It looks like a second filament outside the column. It is not a second cord. I could not tell you what it is." "It is the relay," Nora said. "You cannot see it on standard sequences. You have to know which band to amplify. The setting is in the declassified appendix in a footnote." Okonkwo sat down slowly. He was quiet for a moment, a man who had read this patient's spine a decade earlier at another hospital and seen nothing, and he was doing the arithmetic of that in his head. And it didn't sit easy. 18 years, he said. "None of us saw it. None of you were ever given the chance to," she said. "That is the part I would like people to be angry about when they eventually get around to being angry about something." The EMG came back an hour later. Strong residual motor activity in 3 of the 4 major muscle groups of the lower legs, quadriceps on both sides, right calf, left tibialis anterior. The hamstrings weak but present. Nora wrote the numbers on her index card, and her hand did not shake, and she went and told Marin in the hallway that her father had the cord to walk with the nerves, to carry the signal, and the muscle to answer it, and that what stood between him and standing now was not his spine, but 6 months of the hardest work of his life. Marin did not cry that time. She put a hand flat against the wall and stood very still for a while, and Nora let her. Word travels through a hospital faster than any official channel, and it travels fastest at night. By the time the sun came up, the story of the old soldier in Bay 9, and the night nurse, who was not only a night nurse, had reached the day shift, and by noon it had reached the office of the Institute's medical director, and by 3 o'clock that afternoon there was a meeting. Dr. Helena Marsh ran it. She was a small, precise woman who had directed Calder for 11 years and did not waste a syllable. She wanted to know how Nora had come to possess the array. Nora told her the truth. It had been signed out under her name in the program's final inventory, retained as personal training equipment, in the months before closure, entirely legal to keep. And the protocol it ran had been public since 2019. Marsh listened and asked 2 more questions, and then set both hands flat on the table. "How many other men?" she said. 33 received the relay, Nora said. 19 were alive the last time I had access. That was 9 years ago. Their peripheral nerves have been degrading by the month ever since. Every man we reach in the next 6 weeks has the best chance he is ever going to have. After that, the window starts closing on them one at a time. Then we do not wait 6 weeks, Marsh said. I want a program. I want it built this week. I want you running at Lieutenant Colonel as a civilian on Calder's payroll with full clinical privileges. What do you need? Nora told her. A small clinical team, a rehab specialist with military experience, legal cover, a travel budget for men who could not fly commercial, and someone to answer the phones, because by the following morning, the local news would have the story, and the phones would not stop. They did not stop. The first call from outside came at 5 that evening, a woman in Rockford whose husband had a scar behind his ear, and a chair he had not left since 2007. By 9, there were 6 names. By the end of the week, there were 15, and one of them was a man named Ray Bishop. Bishop had been a ranger. Number 8 on the old list. He came to Chicago on the 9th day, driven by the brother, who did most of the talking, because Bishop himself had not done much talking in years. And when Nora put her hand on the marker at the base of his neck and sent the first pulse, something in the old ranger came apart. He did not cry. He came up out of the past like a man breaking the surface of cold water, both hands seizing the arms of the chair. His eyes gone flat and elsewhere, back in a night in a valley 18 years dead, and his voice, when it came, was not the voice of a man in a Chicago exam room. "Get it off me," he said. "Get it off. Get everybody back. Get them back to the wall." His brother stepped forward, and Nora put up a hand and stopped him without looking. She knelt, so she was below Bishop's eye line, not above it, and she did not touch him. "Sergeant Bishop," she said, and she pitched her voice low and flat, and certain the cadence of a radio call, the cadence a soldier's body obeys before his mind catches up. "This is Kestrel. You are at a casualty collection point. You are off the X. The wall is secure, and your people are accounted for. I need you to breathe on my count and hold this position. In for 4. Bishop's eyes came halfway back. "In for 4, she said again. "Hold. Out for 4. You are off the X, Sergeant. Nobody is at that wall anymore. They all came home. You came home." He breathed. His hands loosened on the chair, one finger at a time. His eyes found the room, again, found the fluorescent light and the tablet on the counter, and his brother standing white-faced in the corner, and the kneeling woman in navy scrubs with a pale graft on her arm. And he came all the way back, and he was ashamed the way those men are always ashamed, and Nora did not let him be. "That was not a setback," she told him. "That was your body remembering it survived. We can do the rest of this slow. We can do it over 3 days if you need 3 days. You are in no hurry now. You have got the time you were told you would never get." Bishop looked at her for a long moment. "You were one of them," he said. "The Annex people, the ones who disappeared." "I was," Nora said. "I came back." That was the sentence that ran 3 days later under the photograph on the front page, the one a hospital volunteer had taken without anyone posing for it. Nora kneeling in front of the old ranger's chair, with her hand up and her face calm. The headline was 4 words. She came back for them. She was in her borrowed second-floor office at 8 the next morning, 3 folding chairs, and a phone and a window onto the parking structure, when the man from the Department of Defense walked in without knocking. Colonel Wade Ferris Gray sued a younger attorney behind him with a leather folder, and both of them sat down across the desk without being asked. "Lieutenant Colonel Calloway," Ferris said, "you removed controlled materials from a federal facility in 2013, and you have been using them to perform unauthorized procedures on civilians. I retained legal personal equipment signed out under my name, running a protocol your own department declassified in 2019, Nora said. On retired servicemen, with full informed consent, every one of them a man your department told me to abandon." The attorney cleared his throat. "There are national security considerations, Ms. Calloway. There were counselor in 2013. There are not in 2026. The protocol is public. The device is no longer manufactured. What you are protecting now is not a secret. It is an embarrassment, and I am not going to help you keep it comfortable." Ferris's jaw tightened. "I am authorized to halt further procedures pending a formal departmental review." "How long?" 18 months. Nora did not move her folded hands from the desk. "There are men on that list. who have been in a chair since before this attorney finished law school," she said. "3 of them have already died waiting since I started making calls. Do you understand what 18 months costs a man whose nerves have been dying since 2007? I do. I have the arithmetic memorized. Which of them would you like me to phone first to tell them to hold on?" The door opened. Helena Marsh came in first, and behind her, a tall, older woman in a charcoal suit that did not entirely hide 30 years of prior wear, and behind them, 2 attorneys of Calder's own. Marsh did not sit. "Colonel Ferris," she said, "this is Brigadier General Ruth Okafor, United States Army retired, who chairs this institution's ethics board. Before you go any further, you should know that I have spent the last 14 hours on the phone with the offices of 2 United States senators, both of whom sit on armed services with the Office of the Army Surgeon General and with the legal counsel of 3 veterans organizations. Calder is prepared to defend Lieutenant Colonel Calloway and this program in any venue you would like to choose. Are you prepared to defend in open court the 11-year delay your department has already imposed on these men?" Ferris did not answer. Okafor did. Her voice was quiet and did not need to be anything else. "Wade, the program should never have been closed, and you and I both know it because we were both in the room when it was. Those men on that list were ours. She is bringing them back. Stand down and let her." Ferris looked at the general for a long moment. The attorney leaned over and murmured something, and whatever it was, Ferris's mouth pressed into a thin line, and he stood, and he picked up the unopened folder, and he looked at Nora across the desk. "I argued against the closure in 2013, he said. "I lost that argument. I have thought about it for 13 years. "Then you know exactly what I'm doing," Nora said, "and exactly why." "I should have done it myself." "Yes, sir, you should have." He nodded once. He turned and left, and the attorney followed him, and when the door had closed, General Okafor looked at the woman behind the desk in the borrowed office, and she brought her right hand up to her brow, slowly and deliberately, and held it. Nora stood and returned it, and the general nodded once and went out, and Helena Marsh sat down in the chair Ferris had left. Warm and said, "Lieutenant Colonel, go to work." Nora did. 7 months after the gray Tuesday that Nora Calloway walked into Bay 9 and looked at a scar 4 other men had decided not to see, the Calder Neuroscience Institute held a small ceremony in its ground floor auditorium. It was not a press event. Those had already come and gone 3 weeks of national noise in the winter after the front page, then a quieter stretch, then a technical paper, in a spine journal in the spring with Nora's name and Holloway's on it. In that order, which Holloway had insisted on. Today's gathering was internal. Staff, the ethics board, the veterans and their families. The auditorium held 200 people and it was full. In the first 3 rows sat the men, 14 of them. Each one had been in a chair on the night Nora untied the roll in her locker. Each one now stood for at least part of every day. 7 walked with canes. 4 wore light braces. 3 walked with nothing at all. They had been told they could come in ordinary clothes, and every one of them had refused. They had gone home to closets and to tailors, and to boxes packed in mothballs since the year of the injury, and each man wore his uniform. Some of them hanging loose on frames that 18 years of stillness had thinned, and every one of them wore it anyway. Ray Bishop was there in his ranger tan beret, sitting very straight, his brother beside him. James, who had not slept a full night in 19 years, was there beside his wife, and had told Nora in the hall that morning that he now slept until the sun woke him. Behind the veterans sat the families and the therapists and the residents. Priya Anand sat in the 3rd row, no longer looking like a woman waiting for permission to believe things. Garrett Holloway stood at the very back, hands behind him, a little grayer at the temple than he had been in the winter. Helena Marsh spoke first and briefly. She introduced the program, and the men and the doctors and nurses and therapists who had built it in 7 months from nothing. She did not introduce Nora. Nora had asked her not to. Then Marsh said, "Sergeant Major Thorne has asked for the floor." The room went still. Elias Thorne stood up from his seat in the front row. He used a cane, and his left hand rested for a moment on Toby's shoulder. And then he let go of the boy and walked to the lectern by himself. And the only sound in that auditorium was the slow, deliberate click of the cane on the polished floor. A man who had not walked to a podium in 18 years, crossing 30 feet of it, under his own power, while 200 people held their breath. He reached the lectern. He set the cane against its side. He gripped the edges with both hands and looked out at the room. "I was told by 9 doctors in 5 hospitals that I would die in that chair," he said. I believed them. I told my daughter to stop hoping. I told my son to stop hoping. And then my son died before I could tell him I had been wrong to say it. And that is a thing I will carry. I made peace with a lie, because the lie asked less of me than hope did. He paused, and looked down, and looked up. On a Tuesday night last winter, my daughter drove me here in the rain for one more no. And a night nurse walked into the room, and she did the one thing that 18 years of specialists hadn't done. She looked at me. She actually looked. The room did not move. "In 7 months," he said, 14 men who were written off by the country they served have stood up out of their chairs. More are coming. And 3 men on that list did not live to see this day. And I am not going to stand up here on my own 2 legs and let their names go unsaid. To Walter Dung, to Marcus Ford, to Sam Reyes. I am standing because you cannot. I do not forget it. His voice did not shake. 30 years of speaking over engines and gunfire had seen to that. I want to thank the people of this hospital. I want to thank Dr. Holloway, who found the nerve to be wrong out loud and then to be right, where nobody could see it. I want to thank my daughter Marin and my grandson Toby, who never once stopped hoping even the whole time I was ordering them to. He let a breath go. And I want to thank one more person whose name is on none of the program documents, who by every official measure the United States has available to it is nothing but a nurse. His eyes moved along the front row, man by man. Bishop met them. James met them. One by one, each man gave the smallest possible nod. "Lieutenant Colonel Nora Calloway," the sergeant major said. "Would you come forward?" Nora was in the second row. She had not been told this part was coming. She stood in plain navy scrubs, the pale graft on her forearm, and she walked to the front, her steps quiet on the carpet. The sergeant major stepped out from behind the lectern. He did not take up the cane. He walked the 3 steps to her on his own legs, slow and steady and level, and the room watched him do it. He stopped in front of her, and he brought his right hand up to his brow, slow and exact, and he held it. In the first 3 rows, 14 men came to their feet. 7 on canes, 4 in braces, 3 unassisted, each of them pushing up out of a chair that most of them had been told they would die in, and each of them brought his hand to his brow and held it. From the 3rd row, Priya Anand stood and raised her hand, and beside her, 3 staff Nora had not known were veterans, stood and did the same. And at the very back of the room, Garrett Holloway, who had never worn any uniform in his life, brought his right hand up to his temple in the imperfect civilian shape of a salute, and held it too. Nora's throat closed. Her chin stayed level, and her eyes stayed level, and she raised her right hand, the hand with the graft, the hand that had pressed the marker, the hand that had not untied the roll in 9 years. And she returned it, and she held it, and for a moment, the whole room stood with its hands to its brows, and nobody breathed. Then she lowered her hand, and the men lowered theirs, and the room came apart into applause that started soft and grew and did not stop for a long time. When it finally quieted, the sergeant major leaned in close so only she could hear. "The Army and the Air Force," he said, "on my recommendation, and the recommendation of 6 general officers, have formally asked that you accept reinstatement to active duty at the rank of full colonel as the founding director of a joint recovery program. They will build it around you." Nora was quiet for a moment. She looked at the 14 men and their families. She looked at Anand and at Bishop's tan beret and at the old soldier in front of her, standing on legs a medic had saved in the dark 18 years ago. Sir," she said, "I am honored, and I am going to decline." The sergeant major did not flinch. "I took off the uniform for a reason," she said. "I came here for a reason. These men deserve to be seen by someone who chose to look at them, not by an officer inside a chain of command that once ordered me to look away. I will work with the department. I will sit on every committee they want me on. But I am going to keep the scrubs, and I am going to stay the director of this program as a civilian, as a nurse." She touched the worn brass coin in her pocket through the fabric. The men on that list were failed by a system that had every reason to remember them and chose not to. I would rather be the person who came back on her own than the person the system finally allowed to. The old man looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded. "Once the way you acknowledge a decision you understand all the way down." "Understood, Lieutenant Colonel," he said. "Civilian or otherwise, this hospital is fortunate, and so am I." The reception filled the hall next door with a sound none of those families had made in 18 years, the plain, ordinary noise of laughter. Marin found Nora near the door and put both arms around her without asking, and held on for a long 5 seconds. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet and her voice was steady. "We moved his bed to the ground floor in 2008, she said. "He has not slept upstairs in his own room in 18 years. This Saturday he is going to climb the stairs and sleep in it. He told me yesterday he wants his room back." She pressed her lips together. "I do not know how to thank you for that." "You do not owe me any thanks," Nora said. "He did the work. You did the work. You never stopped hoping even when he ordered you to. I only untied a roll of cloth nobody knew was in my locker." "You untied a roll nobody knew was there," Marin said. "That is the whole thing. That is everything." She went back to her father, and Toby was already at his side, and the 3 of them stood together near the front. Marin's hand on the old man's back, the boy's hand on his shoulder, the sergeant major leaning on neither of them, standing on his own. Garrett Holloway came up beside her, holding 2 paper cups. He handed her one. Coffee black, no sugar. He had noticed at some point in 7 months how she took it. "There are 5 names we still have not found," he said. "I know, Doctor. I would like to keep looking." "Yes, Doctor." "So would I." He was quiet a moment. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said. "Thank you." She nodded once and drank the coffee, and it was the right temperature, and she walked out of the reception and down the long hall toward the elevators. The fluorescent lights hummed the way they always had. The east corridor on the 3rd floor was waiting. She stepped off the elevator and walked past the consult desk, where a chief had once asked her for coffee in a voice that did not look at her. She walked past Bay 5, where she had caught a sliding pressure on a Tuesday evening a lifetime ago. She walked to the last glass room at the end of the hall. Bay 9 had a new patient in it, a woman this time in her 50s, a chair a scar Nora could see from the corridor at the base of her skull. Through the glass, a young man stood gripping the handles, and an older man sat exhausted in the corner, and the woman herself sat with her head bowed, looking at her own hands, the way people learn to look at them after enough years of no. Nora paused at the door. Her thumb found the coin in her pocket and turned it once and let it go. She breathed in through her nose. She pushed the door open. Good evening, she said. I am Nora Calloway. I will be your nurse tonight. They told Elias Thorne his cord was dead for 18 years, and it was not dead. It was waiting for one person willing to look. That is the thing about the people the world decides to overlook, the ones written off and wheeled to the back and told to make peace with less. Sometimes the whole difference between a lie you die inside and a life you walk back into is a single person who refuses to stop looking at you. If Nora and the Sergeant Major reached something in you tonight, do me that small favor. Tell me in the comments the city you are listening from and subscribe to stay with this family, because there are 5 more men out there, and we are not finished finding them. And before you go, tell me this. If you had been standing in that room, would you have had the nerve to speak up the way she did? I will be reading every answer. I will see you in the next one.